In conversation with Michael Ryan Han. Micah's books are very cinematic and stories with exciting action, with humor and heart, and different genres with complicated variants, probably because of his upbringing. He comes from a large raucous family and he survived a shockingly bruising but not altogether unfun cadre of violently delinquent Boy Scouts to become an Eagle Scout is great at fight scenes. As a film director, he won Best Feature at GenCon and Best Director at BAFF for his micro-budget, white sci-fi comedy action feature Island Theory, which was shot with a diverse ensemble cast in 40 locations across three states and a budget of just $25,000. Lives in Los Angeles with his wife, actress Elisabeth Meurer. She just co-directed a short film written by Oscar-winner David Rabinowitz. In his spare time, Michael designed custom habitat for cats. The habitats are highly popular for the cats. And on today's episode of Photo Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy and excitement to have on the show today Michael Ryan Han. How are you doing today, Michael?
Doing great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah, it's quite exciting, really, to have you on the show today. I haven't read some of steeping it into your works. I'm excited we're here to sit and talk about it. So thank you so much for coming on.
All right, let's get into it.
Yeah. So, Mike, I need to first say that I was taken aback by the description page of your book, Pistol Rose on Amazon, which is a first book in the Anthem of Hash and Pistol series. I would
Yeah.
like to ask you how the book came about and what inspired you to write Pistol Rose.
Well, I like a lot of history, and throughout all of history, I found that there's always tyranny, there's always the fight for liberty, and there's always the fight for tyranny. It's a
Oh,
timeless thing. So whatever's going on in the world today, tomorrow, or yesterday, it kind of touches on that. And I wanted to tell a really deeply emotional story about a family fighting against tyranny in a way I hadn't seen very much before. So it's a world where suddenly people are not allowed to get married anymore. They're taken over by another people, and marriage is completely illegal. They'll kill you. They'll do whatever they can to stop you from doing it. But a young couple wants to get married anyway, and their family decides we're going to throw the biggest party anyone's ever had. Deep in the woods, we won't get caught. It'll be fine. But it's an act of sheer rebellion. And everything, of course, comes to a head when they try to do this. So that was kind of like the nugget of the idea. You know, I love movies like Braveheart and The Princess Bride, and this was actually written first as a screenplay, and over the latter part of the pandemic, I turned it into a book, and that got me going. And I've been working on the sequels to it. I'm editing the second book now, and it's going to be a 7-part series. So it goes and goes. It's a very, very big story. Each book is its own thing, but it's a very generational story. Each book will kind of cover some of another generation of the family.
It's interesting that you say that you like Braveheart and Princess Bride. Those are like on two different spectrums of the scope. I mean, Braveheart, if I remember correctly, that was with Mel Gibson.
Yeah,
And
it's an older movie about the Scots fighting for
yes,
freedom a long time
yes.
ago.
But
Yeah,
it's their liberty, which is what a lot of stories are written about. You're
yeah.
right.
So those are sort of like the two cinematic examples that maybe correlate most of this, because on the one hand, you've got the deep emotional struggle for a people's freedom, and on the other hand, you kind of have witty, funny characters who are
Exactly.
they're not cynical, making cynical jokes and stuff, but they're fun people who, if they die, some of them want to die laughing.
oh wow.
So
So
that's
you're
kind of
drawing your
the
readers in differently to a book that's kind of written in a unique way between a blend.
that's the goal. It's meant to be for everyone. I really enjoyed, if you have friends who have completely different ideologies and they can like the same thing. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. Is some people will access it this way, other people will access it that way, and hopefully everyone really, really enjoys it.
I'm sure they will. For the sake of P English literature people that are listening, could you tell us like some of the themes and the subject lines picking up Pistol Rose, what they might encounter?
Sure. So tyranny is sort of a very, very broad thing, but if you think of it as one of the things the family struggles in a lot with this is the government coming in and telling them what they can do and what they can't do. And that goes all the way back to, well, as long as history has been written. you can talk
Mm.
about that. And so there's this constant struggle within the family dynamics, like around their dinner table. They're arguing in their world about should we do this, should we not do this. They have some debate that, you can still get married if you just go and get permission, and it shouldn't be that hard to
Yeah.
get permission. And the main character's older cousin, goes to do that, and it goes completely terribly wrong. They don't give her permission. They abduct her would-be husband and do something horrible to him, and she's completely devastated by it. So our young Pistol Rose, who's like 10 at the time this happens, grows up knowing if you ask permission from the authorities, you're not going to get it, and it's going to be really, really bad. So then when she's 20 or 22, she wants to get married, and there are elements in her family who are like, no, go get permission. It'll be fine. And she's like, are you crazy? You know what could probably happen.
Wow.
Well, they try to get permission anyway, even though she doesn't want to do it. The family kind of agrees, let's go and try to get permission. They think they have it figured out, that they're able to squeeze the emissary into telling them yes. They've worked out a plan. And they get there, and the emissary's been replaced by someone who's much less lenient, and they're
Mm.
stuck. And the guy says, "No, I'll give you permission on the record so that everyone stops complaining and saying that we don't do that. But off the record, you have 2 weeks, and this man has to go to war because we have things that are going on that are more important than you."
Mm.
And so that's when the family decides, all right, we're going to throw the wedding, and then we're going to try to go into hiding. But it doesn't exactly work. And the young man who's getting married has a younger brother who's very, very jealous and would like Rose for himself if he could figure that out. And he's sort of working with the villains of the story. There's two peoples. There's the Poonemen, who are the wonderful woodsy people who live out in the forest, and there's the Strelki, who live in an advanced city. So the whole story takes place in the future, but it's a medieval future. So if medieval
Wow.
times had continued to go, and people had, holographic cell phones in the future, the mix that we have sort of also a steampunk kind of sensibility to kind of tie everything together. Everybody really cares about their gadgets and their hats and their goggles and their weapons. Some weapons are just sort of a fashion statement, but most of them work very well if need be. And people get very violent very quickly, but it's not a gratuitous, gross kind of a thing. It's more just like a brutal emotional expression. So you've got some of these themes of when is violence appropriate, when is it not, and families arguing with each other about what do we do to survive? Do we run away? Do we
Mm.
stand and fight? Is it worth standing and fighting? And all these generational issues coming together. So the wedding ends up not being necessarily just for the two people who are getting married. Everybody's been to a wedding, and it's a fun celebration. This is really more about the families coming together who aren't really sure about each other. This is a fast thing, but they all want to rebel and they want to have a party. And in a
Mm.
way, the wedding sort of becomes secondary because they want to fight back, and they're not sure if they can. So they start it like this, but then everything comes to a head and they have to fight for real.
Wow, that's quite amazing, really. I find your response to be quite fondly futuristic. I like the fact that you mentioned the family dynamics in the book. I like you to show the cover of the book again to the camera just so it's what it looks like.
Sure. So there's a story behind the cover of this book. The center of it is a silhouette of a man and woman kissing at a wedding. And
Yeah.
that actually comes from a photograph of my parents when they were married,
Oh.
well before I was born. And so I
Oh.
added all kinds of things to it myself. I'm a photo shopper. And so I
Oh.
added wedding stuff. They were not married with weapons. They were much more traditional than that. But in my story,
That's good to know.
yeah. Though they like it. They like this picture a lot. Though in my story, it would be foolish to get married without ammunition at the
Oh,
ready.
wow. That's a fun background story you've given us in there. More reason, actually, why I feel like every book cover has a story hidden in it. There's a
Mhm.
story in a novel put separately from another story hidden behind the book cover. From one book to another, the story may differ from one book to another, which is quite exciting, really. I love the fact that you had to mention that. Now, I'd also like to ask you, yeah, what is the futuristic medieval steampunk world of Pixel Rose like? That's my first question. And also, will there be more books in the world of Pixel Rose to come in the future, perhaps?
Yeah, so the world is, if you imagine any movie you've seen that's medieval with swords or swashbuckling, anything like that. If
Yeah.
we kind of kept that style going forward well into the future, and if there was also technology involved. So the rich people don't have cell phones, but they have something kind of like that. They don't have AI, but they have gadgets that do some things
Mm.
for them. And the poor people who are more connected to nature, which might look a little bit like colonial times out in
Mm.
America. If you've seen things like that too. It's sort of a mishmash of that. That's what that world is like. So they're not vehicles. They're trying to work on flight, but they have like fire that you can't extinguish, and they have all kinds of weapons. So the closest thing to it might be something like World War I, where there's a mix of horses and guns, but they don't have like tanks or anything like that. So it's very
Mm.
medieval, but with a twist. And then there's a steampunk sensibility, which is largely in their fashion. I tried to build my own kind of culture around it. A lot of steampunk we've seen has sort of been set in the Victorian area, and
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I wanted to imagine what would it be like if we futurized it a little bit more and gave it a fun medieval sensibility. So you had people in armor and chainmail and leather and all kinds of fancy uniforms and gunpowder and just everything like that kind of mixed together, but in a very thorough way. Like the Pooneman culture, your last name comes first. So Pistol
Yeah.
Rose,
Oh.
everyone in the family is Pistol. And their family are sort of like the blacksmithing gunsmiths. So they're known for that. And then there's like the Clock family, and they make calendars and clocks and watches and all kinds of devices like that. There's the Teeth family, they're the dentists. There's the Iron family, they forge. So there's all these different family lines about that. So that kind of plays into it too. And then, so that's the Pooneman. Then on the Strelke side from the city, their names aren't like that. And the big cultural difference between these people is that they're separated at birth. So whenever someone is born, they go to a birthing hospital, kind of what they call the line between where the forest ends and the city begins. And
Mm.
neutral examiners and nurses there, where whenever someone is born, they decide if that child is going to be a Strelke or Pooneman. And they send them to the city for the Strelke and the forest for the Pooneman. So sometimes the Pooneman get to keep their children. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they adopt Strelke children. So you sort of have mixes where the only way you can tell if someone belongs to a family or not is by their clothing, by their trade, by what they do,
Yeah.
because it's a real mix of adoption. And in the city, they don't have families. They rotate romantic partners every 3 years. If you're two people together, you have a child who could be, just born to 18. And they do that for their idea of societal unity, so that everyone is supposed to love everyone. But it really makes them all very depressed. And on the Pooneman side, they're like, no, we want to do families. And so we live in this kind of strange world here where if every time a woman has a baby, something may or may not happen to it. And it's a
Mm.
horrific struggle for them. So the Poonemen are itching for a fight anyway,
Oh.
things this way anymore. And then when the Strelke come in and they say, hey, the way we do it in the city is the way you're going to do it now, they can't take that anymore.
Wow.
I really am liking how you're talking about the futuristic elements that you're tying into historical elements because I love history. So I think it puts a new weave or a new light on a story and stuff. I've not read much steampunk, so but I did find it kind of interesting that you have another book out. I believe that's called Children of the Storm, which by the way, I do like that title.
Thanks.
But I wondered if you don't mind just explaining a little bit about that book as far as what was your inspiration behind Children
Sure.
of the Storm.
I have that one sitting here. I'll show you the cover of that. So
Oh, great, great.
this is the Children of the
Beautiful one as
Storm.
well.
This is a novella. So
Oh.
this was a very specific point of inspiration for me. When I was a Boy Scout, we were at a camp in Ohio, and there was a tornado scare, and we all had to leave our camps and run across a huge open field to go to the dining hall. And that sort of made it into the book. And I remember a moment where we were running across an open field, and we looked up, and the clouds were pink and they were swirling, and a funnel was
Mm.
starting to form. And we're like, okay, 400 Boy Scouts cramming into a 200 seat building in a basement that can't really hold anybody. That was a very interesting, exciting
Intense.
time to be like 15 or 16 or something like that. I don't remember. So the beginning of that book kind of starts out at a camp like that with Boy Scouts, and my troop was very, I mean, playfully delinquent is maybe a way to say it. It was brutal and tough, and it was a good group of guys ultimately, but as a kid, it was a very scary time. You know, when you're a kid, you can often feel like you're going to die at any moment because the bully brought a knife and he's going to use it. And yeah, he'll get in trouble, but you'll be in the hospital. Like there are some very terrifying things that happen in life around that time, and
Mm.
Boy Scouts wasn't better than any other place. And looking back, it's all great stories and it was great development and great fun. And you know, nobody died, but it was a lot of intensity, and I wanted to tell that into a story. And I thought, what if we did it in a way with monsters? So that has a kid who's from the Boy Scouts, and then there's like a girl from not the countryside, but out in houses like that are scattered out in the country. There's a
Wow.
boy from the city. There's someone else in between. These three or four kids who don't know each other end up coming together because this storm that comes drops invisible monsters, and you can only see them in reflections. You can see them, you know, in the back of a spoon or in a mirror or something like that. And they're carnivorous. They're different sizes, and people don't know what they want. But wherever the storm goes, these invisible things rain and they eat people and terrible things happen. And the kids end up meeting each other and becoming friends, and they have an idea that maybe they can actually stop the storm
Mm.
altogether. And the adults they encounter are of course almost as bad as the monsters are. And they go on this little adventure, this little found family of kids who are like 14, 12 to 14, 11, something like that. So it's not exactly a book for kids, but it's a book kind of about kids.
I need to say that's such a beautiful subject lines in there. And the title too, Children of Storm. And the fact that you had to mention it's not a book for children, yeah. That's quite beautiful, really. I love your take on it, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, Michael, one of the most interesting things to me as a writer is to sit back and listen to readers' feedback. And you may want to agree with me that one of the things that makes literature to be a bit complex is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions. And sometimes the readers might get a message intended by the author. Sometimes they might be far from getting the message. Sometimes it might be close, or sometimes it might hilariously be several miles away or kilometers away from getting the message. And as illustrative fun as they sound, I would like to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? How does that make you feel as an author?
You know, having people enjoy your stuff and respond to it is kind of what it's about. It in a way, I kind of feel like the book doesn't really exist until it exists in somebody else's mind. It certainly doesn't
Yeah,
exist for them, and the same is true with movies for the audience. It where it really
absolutely.
happens, you know, these are just dry words on a page, and a movie is just a bunch of frozen photos flickering by really quick. It happens in their mind. So
Yeah,
if they want to wrestle with it or think that it means something else, that can be a wonderful thing. I mean, of course, you don't want to be misinterpreted and have people be upset with you for saying something you didn't. And so
yeah,
that's where skill and practice comes in, trying to make sure that your intention is as clear as it can be. But if people have varying ideas, I kind of think that's fun and exciting. And I think it can be very fun to try to play into that, where if you can have a story who in real life might not get along, you might have a couple of friends where you're like, I can't really put them in the same room because they're going to argue. But if they both like your story for different reasons, now they have something in common.
yeah.
So, you know, different interpretations can be a really, really wonderful thing. So I'm all for read it and interpret away. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I think it's hard to digest different levels of interpretation and stuff
Yeah.
like that, especially when you're intent on a message. So it's really good that you look at it that way. Um, so you've got Children
No.
of the Storm, which that's your novella, but then you've got your book, Pistol Rose. How is it that all of these concepts, and you were talking about frozen photos, but do you like, since you're a film artist, do you actually get these images through your head? Do you write them down? Or exactly what inspires you to put this on paper?
Everything kind of inspires me. You know, every idea probably first wants to be a movie for me, and then
Uh,
sometimes it'll need to be other things. Like over the pandemic, I did a podcast called Fire Pockets, like a comedy podcast, very different from these things, but that's a very very fun kind of a thing. And so it is all visual for me. Even that, which is just audio, is very much people. The feedback I get from that is that people can see exactly what's happening in that
mm,
story. So inspiration comes in all shapes and forms, and I probably have more stories than there is time to tell. And so really it becomes a matter of choosing which ones are going to do their purpose. Sometimes the purpose is I want a lot of people to really love this and like it. Other times it's I just have a particular person in mind that I'm sort of secretly writing this for, and I hope that they like
Mm.
it. And imagining your audience specifically can be a great tool too. In fact, that's why, so the Pistol Rose book starts with a letter, essentially. So I guess in a movie it'd be voiceover narration,
Yeah.
welcoming you into the story. But I had a mentor named Ken Rotkop, and he said, if you ever get stuck, write a letter to me and begin your story. And he's like, I'm not necessarily going to read this, but you know me, write a letter to me and start telling your story.
Mm.
And that trick was so good that I just like it. And for the Pistol Rose books, every one of the books will start with the narrator kind of welcoming you into the story and kind of telling you a little bit what's at stake, because stakes are
Wow.
very important. Stakes must be clear. And in the first book, we don't tell you who the narrator is right away. You'll find out deeper in the story who's actually narrating this book, and it
Mm.
is one of the characters, but there's a little bit of mystery in it too throughout the
Wow.
whole. But by the end, all questions are answered. It's a complete story. You could argue there's a little bit of a cliffhanger, but it's really just I think a pleasant entry point to tell more.
That's quite beautiful to know, really. I love your take on that, yeah. I really love your take on that. Sounds to be quite amazing and quite fun. Very great to me as well. Thank you for sharing. And now, Michael, just apart from Children of the Storm and Pistol Rose, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Yeah, so I'm editing the second book of the series, which is about another character in the family whose name is Pistol Tiffin. And
Oh,
Tiffin is not in the first book, but becomes a major character in book two. And a lot of characters, the ones who survive the first book, show up in book two as well. And so throughout the series, it could be a thing where someone who's a main character in one book will become a supporting character in the next one, and then maybe down the line become a main character again.
oh,
Because when it's
wow.
a family, sometimes there's a story where mom is a main character, and other times she's not really on this one, which is very important, and then she comes back in a major way. And
Yeah.
as time goes on,
Mm.
then she's grandma, then she's great grandmother. And
Yeah.
there are certain characters I absolutely just can't part with in the story. So there are different elements to kind of keep them around. There's something called Wilderrucker water. Wilderruckers are these beasts. That's kind of a similar to Princess Bride. They have the rodents of unusual size. We have wildebeests, and they're different from the ROUSs, of course, but they're kind of like
Mm.
they're not werewolves, but if you imagine something like that, they're not humanoid like that. They're these large, terrible beasts that exist in this world.
Yeah.
And if you do some chemistry with them, then you can get basically a solution that slows your aging down. So there are some
Mm.
characters who take Wilderrucker water, and it makes them live a lot longer. So I'm able to keep some characters alive longer in
Wow.
the series than otherwise. It doesn't happen for everybody, and you can of course still get killed. Anybody who dies in the story stays dead. We
Oh,
don't bring people back. So death is permanent in this, but there are those who try to live as long as they possibly can beyond what is natural through whatever steampunk science means they can extract.
that sounds very suspenseful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully.
just slightly, just like, ouch.
You know, very suspenseful. I'm painting an image in my head as we're speaking about the characters, yeah?
Oh, good.
Very
Yeah,
great.
very vivid.
Very vivid, imaginative.
So, just me as an author, when you're a film artist, you are also an author. I am fascinated by authors' journeys and what their publishing experience was like. Can you share with us what your journey was like for yourself? And were there any challenges that you encountered in the process of your writing of either of these books, since you published it and stuff that you could share with us?
Sure. Well, so I had to teach myself how to write a book, and I've 'cause I write screenplays, and so turning a screenplay into a book is
Mm.
something a lot of people have asked me about. And the way that I kind of figured out how to do it was to do it as though you're writing a script. So if you have a screenplay and you're like, maybe this should be a book, and maybe I should, create some IP, some intellectual property for myself with my book and try to sell a lot of copies. you think, well, how do I turn, a screenplay into a book? It seems like a completely different muscle, and it is. So I, step by step, just, you copy your script over into Word,
Mm.
and then you go through and you start to format it around and you add he said, she said, he thought, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. You just do a pass like that. And then you do a pass where, all right, if you're a director, go through and direct all the actors and write that on the page too. And then pretend you're an art director and now explain the stuff we're seeing and the stuff they're wearing. And then get a little bit deeper in their motivation for what they're thinking. And basically, if you've made like an indie film and you've done every job on the set, do a pass of your manuscript where you do each of those things, but in writing. And then you'll have a really clunky, awful draft.
Mm.
But all the stuff will be there. And then you can start to finesse it and refine it. And then it starts to feel like a book. And for what I did was I kept it in the present tense because I had worked so hard at writing to really have my present tense voice, which is what you do in a script. And so Children of the Storm and Pistol Rose are both in the present tense. I'll have other things that I write will be past tense, of course. And I feel like people get into that pretty quickly. At first, it can be a little tricky, but it's actually easier for me to write in present tense than it is to write in past tense. Just kind of
Mm.
how I'm wired.
Wow.
So that was the creative journey of it. And then for publishing, I really like self-publishing. I like everything about it, and so I'm sort of into that. I suppose if a large publishing house came to me and wanted to talk, we could definitely talk and see what they had to say. But I'm not really interested in like the vanity publishing world. That's a rough space. I've heard some things about that. I've seen some things about that, and I think fully independent or in partnership with someone who really values your story and cares about it and wants to help push it. Those are the two roads.
Hmm.
That's
That
very
makes sense.
amazing. When we were speaking, I had to take some notes in here, yeah. I like the fact that you mentioned you wrote in present tense. It's actually been a long while. I read a book in that category because writing style is quite something that makes novel to stand out in a unique manner. But
Most
yeah, what
definitely.
most of the ones I've read so far are in third person past tense,
Hmm.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But now you're writing a novel, especially with Pistol Rose in present tense, feels quite amazing to me. Most of the memoir I've read are written in the I point of view, the
Mhm.
personalized point of view, I da 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 da, etc. I wanted to ask, how does it feel like to write in present tense? How were you able to weave in the characterization in a way that it goes smoothly, etc.? I'm not quite sure if you'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, it really helps with point of view because the whole story is told from the narrator's point of view, who's collected stories from who lived through part of the adventure and collected stories from these different people. And so it's not like a bobbing, floating heads kind of thing or hopping heads, I think is what they say.
Hmm.
So it really keeps the point of view into what does this person know? And if you've ever seen a historical documentary, it always fascinated me in kind of a funny, wonderful, funny way that historians will talk about some battle or something, and they will tell you the story in present tense when they talk.
Wow.
They'll say General so and so does this, and he knows this is going to happen, and the leader of this country is planning this, and they kind of slip into this storytelling mode where they make it alive again, and if it's all present, you really feel like with Children of the Storm even more so. That's very different. That's Children of the Storm is not steampunk. It's sort of kind of horror, it's science fiction, and things are happening. Things are going wrong immediately, and you feel like you're in it, sort of like you're on a theme park ride, and it just goes off like a shot. And so
Oh,
it's very effective for that, and I just like it for Pistol Rose. I'm comfortable with it. It keeps the voice consistent, and it also really makes you think about what is the main character seeing and hearing and feeling and experiencing. And if you hop around to get more perspectives, which you can still do in present tense, because
mm,
it's the narrator saying, "Here's how I know it." And I wanted to lean into it and make it feel like the narrator is really talking to you on the page. Like this is almost a conversation where you're just being quiet and listening.
yeah.
And, and he's telling us that like every time he closes his eyes, he sees the story. So for him, it's alive, it's in his mind. And then in future stories, I'm gonna have um, other narrators will be involved, and then one of them is actually a prophet who claims that she can actually see things for real, and tries to emulate this narrator style with her tellings of events that happen. So I like there being a reason into it. I really want to lean into the form of whatever I'm doing. Like with the podcast Fire Pockets, that's a guy who's talking to us as he's going through adventures, and we're actually hearing his recordings as he's doing it. So that's like leaning into the form with that, leaning in the form with a book or with a movie or a screenplay, whatever it is, really make the constraints that come with that kind of like part of the story, make the frame of the painting part of the painting. That's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, interesting. I love your take on that. I love your answers. I was just popping up in my head and imagine how did you do that? That's quite beautiful to know. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the short story in there. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, what advice would you give to other authors trying to get their books out there? And this is a two-parter question. Where can we also find your book?
Well, Amazon, you can find Pistol Rose and the Wedding that Sparked War on Amazon, and Children of the Storm too. Now there are two different covers for Children of the Storm. This is the one that I have self-published. I was with the publisher before. It had a different cover, like a giant claw coming down, and that book's out of print. I think you can maybe still get it, but look for this one. That's the
Yeah.
one that you want if you want Children of the Storm. And the advice I would give would be to write a lot, more than you even think you should, so that you can get to a point where you're not precious. It's so much easier to edit your work if you're not precious over every little thing. So if you've written, 3 manuscripts and none of them you're ever going to publish, like that's kind of a good thing. It's like a workout. You're stronger now, and now you're ready for the next thing. And that can sound scary to be like, why would I put in all this time into a thing that's not going to see the light of day? But that doesn't mean that it's not. It doesn't mean that you're not going to go back years later and fix it. I think I recently read that Tolkien said that his best stuff was always, I don't think he used the word stuff, but his best stuff was something that he wrote, 4 or 5 years ago, and then he would edit it after the fact.
Wow.
And so if you just kind of have this volume that you're working on, the quality will catch up to the quantity. So write more than you think you should, and you'll get better and better and better at it. And not being precious about it is a very important thing, because you have to be able to adapt and change. And even for yourself, like your future self will be really happy if you've got a chest of all these different ideas and things, because maybe you'll even just harvest them. Maybe you'll give up on a story, but be like, there's 7 things about this I really like. I think those belong in something new, or I just like the title or whatever it is. So if you're always making things, eventually you'll just get really good at it.
Absolutely. That's a great advice you've got in there, and I'm hoping that viewers, even including myself, would love to utilize it. And I also left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Micah Hyan book directly on Amazon, Barnes& Nobles, on his website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to his social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Michael, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. And also, this conversation is very great, more than awesome, quite exciting. Having you on, having a conversation around Children of Storm and Pistol Rose and your upcoming book in the series is quite great, quite lovely, quite interesting, quite captivating. And I must say, I learned a lot also in the case of the conversation. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
We enjoyed having you on P English Literature.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.